Before you listen, if you enjoy the stories and want to hear more, then please consider subscribing. Most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please take this time to subscribe. Turn on notifications so you'll never miss a story and be the first to hear. You'll also be supporting me. Thank you. This was back when I was barely 13, sporting my oversized school uniform, dirty black shoes, and a hefty backpack. Life was all about acing algebra tests, soccer practice, and hanging out with friends at the local arcade. But one day, everything took a spine-chilling turn. On that afternoon, the sun was shining bright, casting long shadows as I made my way back home from school. As I turned onto my street, a quiet cul-de-sac lined with identical houses and well-manicured lawns, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Two men, strangers, were standing at my front door, their backs to me. Instantly, I felt a weight of unease wash over me, a gut feeling telling me that something was off. They didn't look like the mailman or any of the neighbors I knew. I made a split-second decision to walk past my house, hoping to go unnoticed. Both my parents were at work, and my brother and sister were still at school. From my hiding spot behind the massive oak tree, I was close enough to see them, far enough to stay out of sight. They were two, dressed in nondescript clothing. Not the kind you'd expect from a mailman or a delivery guy. No logos, no identifiable marks, just regular clothes that could blend into any crowd. My eyes were glued to them, and I felt a gnawing unease take root in my stomach. I held my breath as one of them glanced around nervously. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out something. It glinted in the sun, thin and metallic. I squinted, my mind racing, trying to make sense of the scene unfolding before me. He moved closer to the door, his actions furtive, and then it hit me. He was picking the lock. I watched, my heart pounding against my ribs like a wild animal in a cage as he worked on the lock. His companion kept a lookout, his head moving robotically from side to side. Sweat trickled down my temples as my eyes darted between the two. Time seemed to stretch and warp, each second an eternity, as I watched my home being violated from my hiding spot. I could see them exchange a glance, a silent conversation passing between them. I watched as the one working on the lock gave a triumphant nod to his partner. The door cracked open, the familiar creak sounding jarringly loud in the eerie quiet. Fear is a funny thing, you knew. It freezes you, paralyzes you, but sometimes it gives you a jolt, a boost of adrenaline that pushes you to act. With no time to think, I sprinted back towards my house. My heart pounded in my ears like a war drum, and every instinct was screaming at me to run in the opposite direction. But I couldn't. Just as they were about to shut the door behind them, I reached the porch, my lungs burning, my knees trembling. In a flustered whirl, I saw them spin around, startled. They mumbled something about delivering a package and how the door was already open. Their faces were a mask of surprise and fear that mirrored my own. Then, as quickly as they had appeared, they were gone. They sprinted away, leaving me standing in the doorway, panting, my mind reeling from the sudden turn of events. My fingers fumbled with my phone, dialing my aunt's number with shaky hands. The wait for her to pick up was the longest 30 seconds of my life. All the while I was standing there, my legs ready to buckle, my eyes darting around in paranoid fear. Would they come back? Was there anyone else around? Questions whirled in my mind like a chaotic storm. After my aunt called the police, my mom came rushing home. Never had I been so relieved to see her car pull into the driveway. The house soon filled with the concerned faces of my uncles and aunts, their hushed whispers and comforting hands making me feel a little less alone. When the police finally arrived, their uniforms a stark contrast to the comforting familiarity of my home, I recounted everything. I was a 13-year-old kid, the protagonist in a harrowing tale of a home invasion. But I was also a hero in a way, the one who stopped the intruders who saved my home. That day changed my life, the memory etched in my mind like a scar. It was a brutal end to my innocent perception of the world, a scary initiation into the realities of life. But it also reminded me of the power of courage, of standing up against fear, even when your knees are shaking. It's a story I carry with me, a haunting reminder of the day I grew up too soon. Alright, let me take you back to when I was just a 7-year-old kid, too small to reach the cookie jar and too naive to know the real horrors that exist in our world. It was back in the old house, the one with the gnarled oak tree in the yard and the worn-out tire swing. You could say life was pretty sweet, well, until that one haunting night. We lived in one of those picture-perfect neighborhoods, where every house was a clone of the other, and the biggest scandal was when Mr. Johnson's tabby cat got stuck in a tree. It was one of those places where you leave your doors unlocked, and everyone knows everyone. I remember that day so clearly. It had been a regular sunny day, filled with bike rides and scraped knees. Night had arrived quietly, bringing along the comforting lullaby of crickets and the serene glow of the moon. I'd gone to bed, exhausted from the day's adventures, not knowing the terror that was about to unfold. Like any other kid, I was a heavy sleeper, the kind that could sleep through a marching band. But that night, a chilling shatter cut through my dreams like a hot knife through butter. I jerked awake, my little heart pounding like a rabbit's, unsure of what had yanked me from my slumber. And then there it was again. The distinct sound of shattering glass, followed by the faintest thud, as if something or someone had landed with a soft thump. I remember feeling this gnawing sensation at the pit of my stomach, a raw, primal fear that I had never felt before. With every ounce of bravery I had, I slid out from under the covers, my feet touching the cold floor. Our room was bathed in shadows, the only light coming from the half-moon outside my window. The hall outside my room seemed like a long, dark tunnel, and I, the reluctant explorer. Creeping down the hallway, I was hyper-aware of every creak and whisper of the old house, each sound magnifying my fear tenfold. It felt like an eternity, that slow, terrifying journey to my parents' room at the end of the hallway. Every instinct was screaming at me to hide under my bed, to pretend everything was fine. But the thought of my parents, possibly unaware of the danger, pushed me forward. Finally reaching their room, I was about to push open the door when it creaked open from inside. Standing in the doorway was my dad, a silhouette against the dim light of their room. In his hands, he held his hunting rifle, a piece of equipment I had seen him clean and maintain, but never used within our home. I remember the raw terror mixed with an odd sense of safety at that moment, looking at my dad holding the gun. He looked like a hero straight out of my comic books, ready to defend his family. But under the veneer of strength, I could see the fear. It mirrored my own, echoing in his wide eyes and taut jaw. He gently closed the door behind him, leaving me alone in the eerie silence of the hallway. A sense of horror slapped over me, a chilling anticipation that hung in the air like a storm cloud. I held my breath, my small hands clenched into fists as I waited, prayed, hoped for everything to be okay. It seemed like hours had passed, the silence only broken by the sporadic creaks of the house and my own shaky breaths. Then, a deafening gunshot echoed through the house, a violent crescendo to the night's symphony of terror. I was too scared to scream, to even move, my small body trembling with fear and shock. I don't remember much about what happened next. Just the dizzying whirl of blue and red lights, the murmur of voices, and the comforting arms of my mom enveloping me. It was over, the night's terror finally had an end. That night was a grim awakening for 7-year-old me. The world wasn't all sunshine and bike rides. There were monsters too, not under the bed, but real ones who lurked in the shadows. But it also showed me the strength and courage that ordinary people, like my dad, could muster when their loved ones were in danger. It's a story I carried with me in a scar of the past, reminding me of the terror, the bravery, and the stark reality of life. One fine autumn day, I found myself heading home after a grueling day of work, the setting sun coloring the sky with hues of orange and red. Little did I know this ordinary day was about to turn into an experience straight out of a suspense thriller. As I approached my home, nestled in the heart of a usually serene neighborhood, I noticed the front door slightly open. An unsettling wave of fear had taken hold of me, casting a dark shadow on the picturesque evening. My home, my sanctuary, was standing violated, the open door an ominous invitation. I paused for a moment, my hand reaching for my phone. Fingers trembling, I dialed the 3 digits that we all hoped we never have to, 911. As the call connected, I glanced around, the familiar sights of my neighborhood suddenly appearing foreign and threatening. Now, here's where my story takes a rather unconventional turn. Against my better judgment and every fiber of my being screaming to wait for the police, I stepped into my house. I was driven by a strange cocktail of fear, curiosity, and a fierce desire to reclaim my violated space. Stepping through the front door felt like crossing the threshold into another world, one where my nice, comforting home was transformed into a crime scene. The familiar hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, and the faint smell of last night's dinner wafting from the kitchen all felt eerily alien. I moved cautiously, every creak of the floorboard reverberating through the unsettling silence, my senses heightened in anticipation. The house was bathed in the soft twilight, the setting sun casting long shadows that danced across the rooms. My heart pounded in my chest, the rhythm akin to a war drum, each beat echoing the gravity of my situation. Just as I was about to head upstairs, a sudden rustling noise from the living room snapped me to attention. My heart skipped a beat as I turned towards the sound, my breath hitched in my throat. And then I saw them, two figures, small and wiry, dashing towards the garden door. In that split second, I caught a glimpse of their young faces, masked, their eyes wide with the same fear that was coursing through my veins. My home was not invaded by hardened criminals, but by kids barely out of their teens, their misadventure painted across their frightened faces. They vanished through the garden door, their panicked footsteps fading into the quiet of the evening. I stood there alone in the silent aftermath, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away. The house now felt even emptier, the remnants of the intrusion hanging heavy in the air. The shrill wail of sirens and the sudden intrusion of red and blue flashing lights brought an almost uncanny element to my normally peaceful neighborhood. No longer was it just a backdrop for barbecues and Sunday lawn mowing. Now it was a crime scene. Police cars came to a screeching halt outside my house, their silhouettes against the setting sun feeling surreal and dreamlike. Each police officer moved with a purposeful stride, their faces set in stern concentration. Their uniforms were starched and neat, badges gleaming under the twilight, a silent testament to their authority and commitment to protect and serve. One group quickly took charge of securing the perimeter. They efficiently cordoned off the area with the iconic yellow tape, their movements swift and precise. Neighbors were peeking from behind curtains, their faces etched with curiosity and concern as the quiet evening was disrupted by the efficient hum of law enforcement in action. Meanwhile, another group of officers, their steps echoing in a now eerie silence, disappeared into the depths of my backyard. The beam of their flashlights danced through the dark, illuminating corners and casting long, specter-like shadows. I could see their vigilant figures through the windows, their bodies taut with anticipation, their every movement belying their alertness and training. My eyes kept shifting from the backyard to the chaos out front, where another officer was busily communicating over his radio, his voice a steady hum against the backdrop of murmured conversations and crackling static. The details of my ordeal were being relayed, the airwaves carrying my surreal story to the distant dispatcher, and perhaps even further. The police officers sprang into action, their experienced eyes scanning the area, their radios crackling with swift communications. With swift, practiced efficiency, they disappeared into the backyard, their shadows merging with the darkness. Moments later, the calm was punctuated by subdued murmurs, followed by the sight of the two kids being escorted out of my backyard by the police, their heads hanging low, their misadventure having met an abrupt end. The night unfolded with a flurry of statements, reassurances, and paperwork. My ordinary home had been a silent witness to an extraordinary event, and I was at the epicenter. I watched as my quiet neighborhood turned into a local crime scene, the surrealism of the situation becoming realer to me by the minute. After that, at least they caught the two kids trying to burgle me.
Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.